They sent the signal knowing no one would come. The galaxy had already abandoned them. But they made one mistake. They didn't know Earth was listening. The distress signal had been broadcasting for 17 cycles before anyone answered. It began as a whisper across the void, a broken string of coordinates wrapped in desperation, sent from a forgotten mining colony orbiting a dying red star. Most of the known civilizations had already passed it by, either too distant, too cautious, or too burdened with their own wars to care. The message repeated endlessly, stripped of dignity over time, reduced to a simple plea. We are under attack. No reinforcements. No evacuation. We will not survive. On the surface of the colony world, hope had become a fragile thing. The attackers came without warning. They descended from the darkness between stars, their ships like jagged shards of night, their weapons silent and merciless. They did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They simply consumed, dismantled, erased. Entire settlements vanished in hours. The defenders, a coalition of miners, engineers, and a handful of security forces, stood no chance. Commander Elra Ven had watched the skies burn on the first day. She stood now in the central command bunker, deep beneath the planet's surface, staring at a flickering tactical display that showed more red than anything else. Each blinking mark was another outpost gone silent, another group of people lost. How many left? She asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. 6 population centers, replied her second in command, Jorik. His eyes were hollow from lack of sleep. Maybe 40,000 civilians total. Less if the northern grid falls. Elra nodded slowly. 40,000 souls, scattered and terrified, waiting for a miracle that wasn't coming. We keep transmitting, she said. Even if no one answers. Jorik hesitated. Commander, no one is coming. Elra didn't respond. She already knew that. Every nearby system had either declined or gone silent. Some had offered sympathy. None had offered ships. The truth was simple. The colony was too small to matter. Too distant to justify the cost. In the vast calculus of survival, they had already been written off. Still, the signal continued. 17 cycles. On the 18th, something changed. At first, it was nothing more than a faint anomaly at the edge of sensor range. A distortion, barely noticeable against the constant interference of the red star's radiation. The technicians almost dismissed it as another glitch. Then it moved. Commander, one of them called out, urgency creeping into his voice. We've got something. Multiple signatures. Unknown configuration. Elra stepped closer to the display. Hostile. Can't tell. They're not matching any known profiles. Jorik frowned. Another wave. The room fell silent as the signatures grew clearer. There were dozens of them, maybe more, emerging from what looked like a localized distortion in space itself. They're not coming from hyperspace lanes, the technician said. It's like they just appeared. Elra's heart pounded. Broadcast on all channels. Identify ourselves. Request identification. The signal went out. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a reply. The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything they had heard before. Calm, direct, almost casual. Distress signal received. This is Earth Expeditionary Task Force Aegis. You're not alone anymore. The room froze. Jorik blinked. Earth. I've never heard of. Doesn't matter, Elra said quickly, though her mind raced. They answered. That's enough. She leaned toward the console. Task Force Aegis, this is Commander Elra Ven of Colony Karth. We are under heavy assault by an unidentified hostile force. Our defenses are failing. If you're capable of assistance, we. The voice interrupted, still calm. We're already engaging. Above the planet, space erupted. The unknown ships moved with a precision that defied expectation. They didn't form traditional battle lines or defensive grids. Instead, they spread out in fluid patterns, each vessel acting independently yet in perfect coordination. The enemy reacted instantly. The jagged ships turned toward the newcomers, weapons charging, preparing to eliminate the new threat as they had everything else. They never got the chance. The first volley from the Earth ships was not a barrage. It was a surgical strike. Beams of concentrated energy lanced across space, striking key points on the enemy vessels with uncanny accuracy. Engines failed. Weapon systems went dark. Entire ships drifted helplessly before detonating in controlled explosions that minimized collateral damage. "What are they doing?" Jorik whispered. Elra stared at the display, unable to look away. "They're dismantling them." It wasn't just the firepower. It was the efficiency. The Earth ships moved like predators that had studied their prey for years, anticipating every move before it happened. Within minutes, the tide of battle began to shift. For the first time since the invasion began, the enemy was on the defensive. In orbit, one of the larger Earth vessels transmitted again. "Commander Ven, we're deploying ground teams. Mark your friendly positions." Elra snapped back to reality. "Send them everything we have. Coordinates, evacuation zones, enemy concentrations." "Done," the technician confirmed. The reply came almost instantly. "Received. Hold your lines." Moments later, streaks of light tore through the atmosphere. Drop pods. Dozens of them. They fell like meteors, blazing trails across the sky before slamming into the surface near the largest surviving population centers. In the ruins of the northern grid, a group of exhausted defenders watched in disbelief as one of the pods impacted just beyond their barricade. The ground shook. Dust and debris filled the air. "Another one of them," someone muttered, raising a weapon. The pod hissed as it opened. What stepped out was not what they expected. The figure was encased in dark armor, scarred and worn but clearly advanced. A visor concealed the face, reflecting the burning skyline. Behind the first came more, each moving with controlled purpose. One of the defenders lowered his weapon slightly. "You're not them." The lead figure paused, scanning the area before speaking. The voice was filtered but unmistakably human. "No," he said, "with the help you called for." The battle on the ground was brutal. The enemy creatures were relentless, towering forms of chitin and muscle, their movements erratic and terrifyingly fast. They had overwhelmed trained security forces with ease. But the Earth warriors did not fight like the defenders. They adapted. Where the defenders had relied on static positions and heavy weapons, the newcomers moved constantly, using the environment, exploiting weaknesses, coordinating without hesitation. Their weapons were varied and precise, each designed for a specific purpose. One soldier used bursts of kinetic rounds to shatter the creature's limbs, immobilizing them before finishing them with a close-range energy blade. Another deployed small drones that mapped enemy movements in real time, feeding data to the entire squad. Left flank, 3 hostiles, low center mass vulnerability, one of them called out. "Copy," another replied, already moving. To the defenders, it looked like chaos. To the Earth warriors, it was a system. Within hours, areas that had been lost were being reclaimed. Evacuation routes were secured. Civilians were escorted to safer zones. The relentless advance of the enemy slowed, then halted, then began to reverse. Commander Elra then watched the reports come in with growing disbelief. "They're pushing 'em back," Jorik said, almost laughing. "They're actually pushing 'em back." Elra allowed herself a small, cautious breath. "Who are they?" The answer came later. The main Earth vessel, designated Aegis Prime, established a direct communication link with the command bunker. The screen flickered to life, revealing a human face for the first time. A woman, perhaps in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm expression. "I'm Admiral Reyes," she said. "Earth Defense Coalition." Elra studied her. "Commander Elra Ven. You arrived at a critical moment." Reyes nodded slightly. "We picked up your signal on the edge of our listening range. Took us some time to triangulate and jump in." "You came a long way," Elra said. "Most wouldn't." Reyes's expression didn't change. "We don't ignore calls for help." Elra hesitated. "You didn't even know us." "No," Reyes said. "But we know what it's like to be alone when something comes for your home." There was a weight behind those words. "What are they?" Elra asked quietly. The ones attacking us. Reyes leaned back slightly. We've encountered similar bioengineered warforms before. Different origin, same concept. They're designed to overwhelm, adapt, and erase. And you've fought them. A faint, humorless smile crossed Reyes's face. More than once. Elra felt a chill. Then you know how this ends. Reyes met her gaze. Yes, it ends with them gone. The final phase of the battle began at dawn. With orbital control shifting in their favor, the Earth fleet initiated a coordinated strike against the enemy's primary landing zones. Precision bombardments weakened the largest concentrations while ground teams advanced to eliminate the remaining forces. Elra insisted on joining one of the forward units. You're the commander, Jorik protested. You should stay here. I've been staying here while my people die, she replied. That ends now. She was assigned to a mixed unit of local defenders and Earth soldiers. The difference between them was stark. The defenders were exhausted, their armor damaged, their movements heavy. The Earth soldiers, though clearly worn, carried themselves with a quiet confidence that bordered on unsettling. One of them approached Elra as they prepared to move out. You're the commander, he said. Yes, he nodded once. Stay close. We'll get through this. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. They advanced into what had once been a thriving industrial sector, now reduced to twisted metal and smoldering ruins. The air was thick with ash. Distant roars echoed through the wreckage. Contact ahead, one of the Earth soldiers said. The creatures emerged from the shadows, larger than most Elra had seen before. Their bodies were scarred, as if they had already survived multiple battles. They're learning, Jorik muttered. So are we, the soldier beside him replied. The fight was immediate and intense. Elra fired her weapon, taking down one of the smaller creatures, but the larger ones kept coming. One lunged toward her, too fast to evade. A human soldier intercepted it mid-leap, slamming into it with enough force to redirect its momentum. He drove a blade into its underside, twisting before pulling back. Move, he shouted. Elra didn't hesitate. The battle surged around them, a storm of motion and sound. The Earth soldiers moved as a unit, covering each other, anticipating threats before they fully emerged. At one point, Elra found herself pinned behind a collapsed structure, her weapon overheated, a creature closing in. She braced herself. A shot rang out. The creature dropped instantly. She looked up to see the same soldier from before. Still with us? He asked. She nodded, catching her breath. Yes, good, he said. We're almost done here. And somehow, he was right. By the end of the cycle, the last of the enemy forces had been eliminated or driven off. The remaining ships attempted to flee, only to be intercepted and destroyed by the fleet in orbit. For the first time in weeks, the skies were clear. The silence that followed was almost overwhelming. Elra stood on the surface, looking out over the battered remains of her colony. It was far from whole, but it was still there. They were still there. Jorik approached her slowly. It's over. She nodded. It's over. Behind them, Earth soldiers moved through the ruins, assisting the wounded, coordinating recovery efforts. There was no celebration, no victory cries. Just quiet, steady work. Admiral Reyes's voice came through her communicator. Commander Ven, we're preparing to depart within the next cycle. So soon? Elra asked. We have other signals to answer, Reyes said. Elra swallowed. Of course you do. There was a pause. You'll be all right now, Reyes added. Elra looked at the horizon, at the people beginning to emerge from hiding, at the first signs of rebuilding. Yes, she said. We will. Another pause. Thank you, Elra said finally. For coming. Reyes's response was simple. You called. The connection ended. In orbit, the ships of Task Force Aegis began to align once more, their forms silhouetted against the fading light of the red star. Without fanfare, without ceremony, they vanished the same way they had arrived, slipping back into the depths of space. Gone, but not forgotten. In the days that followed, the story spread. Of a colony that had been abandoned by the galaxy. Of a signal that no one answered. Until someone did. They thought no help would arrive. They were wrong, because somewhere, out in the vast darkness, there was a world that listened. And when it heard a cry for help, it sent warriors. The first signal after the war did not come from the stars. It came from beneath the surface. 3 cycles after the departure of Task Force Aegis, when the skies had finally settled into a fragile calm and the people of Karth had begun to rebuild, the ground itself started to listen. At first, it was nothing more than faint tremors. Subtle vibrations that rippled through the lower mining shafts. The kind that could be dismissed as aftershocks from orbital bombardment or structural instability. But the miners knew better. They had lived on this world long enough to understand its rhythms. This was not the planet settling. This was something moving. Commander Elra then stood once again in the command bunker, though it was no longer filled with panic. Now it hummed with cautious purpose. Repair crews rotated through shifts. Communications arrays had been partially restored. Hope had returned, but it had not yet grown roots. Report, she said. Jorik pulled up the seismic readings. His expression had that same hollow tension she remembered from the first days of the invasion. Subsurface activity across 3 sectors, he said. Depth ranges inconsistent. Movement patterns, coordinated. Elra's eyes narrowed. Aftershocks don't coordinate. No, Jorik said quietly. They don't. A technician turned from her station. Commander, we're picking up low-frequency transmissions. Not external. It's coming from underground. Elra felt a cold weight settle in her chest. Play it. The room filled with a deep, distorted sound. Not quite a voice. Not quite static. A pulsing rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. Like something was trying to speak. Jorik shook his head. Residual signals from the enemy. Maybe buried tech. Elra didn't answer immediately. Her instincts, sharpened by weeks of survival, told her this was not residue. This was presence. Seal all deep shafts, she ordered. No one goes below level 7 until we understand what we're dealing with. The order came too late. In Sector 9, a maintenance crew had already descended. They were inspecting a collapsed tunnel when the ground split open beneath them. What emerged was not like the creatures they had fought before. Those had been weapons. Brutal, efficient, predictable in their violence. This was something else. It was larger, its body segmented with layers of armored plating that shifted as it moved. Its limbs were not just for attack but for digging, tearing through rock as if it was soft soil. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with a dim, internal light. And it did not charge. It observed. The crew never had a chance to report what they saw. The transmission cut off in a burst of static and a single, broken scream. By the time the response team arrived, there was nothing left but a hollowed-out chamber and claw marks that led deeper into the planet. Elra stared at the footage in silence. They didn't leave, Jorik said finally. They burrowed. Not all of them, Elra replied. Just the ones that matter. The realization spread through the room like a slow-burning fire. The invasion had not failed. It had changed. Commander, the communications officer said, voice tight. We're receiving new seismic spikes. Multiple locations. Elra straightened. How many? Dozens. The ground shook. Across the colony, fractures split open streets and foundations. From the depths, the new creatures emerged. Not in scattered attacks, but in coordinated waves. They avoided heavily fortified areas. They targeted infrastructure, power grids, water supplies, medical centers. They were not just destroying. They were dismantling the colony's ability to survive. They're learning faster, Jorik said. Adapting strategy. Elra's jaw tightened. No, this isn't adaptation. She looked at the distorted transmission still looping on the console. This is control. The truth settled heavily over them. Something was directing them. And it was still here. The first counterattack was a disaster. The defenders, bolstered by the confidence of their recent victory, engaged the emerging threats with the same tactics that had worked before. Static defenses. Concentrated firepower. It failed. The new creatures anticipated their positions, collapsing tunnels beneath them, isolating units, striking from angles that made traditional defenses useless. Within hours, 2 sectors were lost again. Hope began to fracture. "They're taking us apart from the inside," Jorik said, watching the reports come in. "We can't fight what we can't see." Elra didn't respond. Her mind was elsewhere. On a voice. Calm. Direct. "You're not alone anymore." She turned sharply. "Re-establish long-range communications. Full power." The technician hesitated. "Commander, our arrays are still unstable. We might not reach beyond local." "It," Elra said. The room moved. Power was rerouted. Systems strained. The partially repaired array hummed with rising energy. "Channel open," the technician said. "But signal strength is weak." Elra stepped forward. "This is Commander Elra Ven of Colony Karth," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "We are under renewed attack. Enemy forces have adapted and established subsurface control. We believe a central intelligence is directing them. We cannot hold without assistance." She paused, then added quietly, "If anyone is listening, we need help." The signal went out, and this time, the silence felt heavier. Hours passed. The situation worsened. Entire districts went dark as power grids failed. Emergency shelters were compromised. Civilians were forced to move again, fear returning stronger than before. "They won't come back," Jorik said, not unkindly. "They have other worlds to save." Elra didn't look at him. "They said they don't ignore calls for help." Jorik exhaled. "And maybe they can't answer all of them." Before Elra could respond, the communications console lit up. "Incoming transmission," the technician said, disbelief in her voice. "Origin. Earth fleet signature." The room froze. The signal stabilized, and the now familiar voice filled the bunker. "This is Admiral Reyes. We read you, Commander." Elra closed her eyes briefly, a flicker of relief breaking through the tension. "You came back." Reyes's tone was unchanged, but there was an edge to it now. Focus. Urgency. "You've got something new down there." "Yes," Elra said. "They're coordinated. Directed." "We're seeing it," Reyes replied. "We tracked unusual energy signatures after we left your system. Something stayed behind. Buried itself." Elra's voice tightened. "Can you stop it?" A brief pause. Then, "We can try." Above the planet, space distorted once more. Task Force Aegis returned. But this time, they did not spread out. They formed a tight orbital grid, scanning, probing, mapping the planet's interior with precision that bordered on invasive. "We're looking for the source," Reyes said. "Whatever is controlling them, it's deep." "How deep?" Elra asked. "Deeper than your mining operations ever reached." Elra felt the weight of that. "How do we get to it?" Reyes didn't hesitate. "We don't go around it. We go through it." The plan was simple and terrifying. A single insertion team would descend into the deepest accessible shaft, then push further, using specialized drilling equipment and controlled detonations to carve a path toward the signal source. It would be a one-way mission unless they succeeded. Elra volunteered immediately. Jorik tried to stop her. "You're the commander. You can't." "I am the commander," she said. "Which means I don't send people into something like this alone." There was no argument after that. The team was small. 5 Earth soldiers, 2 local engineers, and Elra. The descent began in silence. The elevator shaft creaked as it lowered them into darkness. Emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows on the reinforced walls. At level 7, they passed the last safe zone. At level 8, the air grew colder. At level 9, the walls began to change. The rock was no longer smooth. It was carved, not by machines, but by something organic. Patterns etched into the surface, pulsing faintly with that same low-frequency energy. "It's everywhere," one of the engineers whispered. The lead Earth soldier scanned the tunnel. "Stay close." They moved forward. The deeper they went, the more the environment shifted. The tunnels widened, then narrowed unpredictably. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting almost imperceptibly. Then they heard it, the same sound from the transmission. Stronger now, clearer, not random. rhythmic, like a heartbeat. They entered a vast chamber. At its center was the source. It was not a creature in the traditional sense. It was a mass, a living structure, fused into the rock, its surface layered with organic plating that pulsed with energy. Tendrils extended outward, disappearing into the surrounding tunnels, connecting it to the entire network below. It was the mind behind the invasion, and it was awake. The moment they stepped into the chamber, the ground shifted. From the shadows, the new creatures emerged. Dozens of them. Guardians. The lead soldier raised his weapon. Contact. Elra stepped forward, her grip tightening. "This is it," she said. The battle that followed was unlike anything they had faced before. The chamber itself fought them. The ground shifted, walls closing in, forcing them into tight formations. The creatures attacked in waves, coordinated with the pulsing of the central mass. "Focus fire on the core," one of the soldiers shouted. They tried, but every time they advanced, the Guardians pushed them back. "We can't reach it." Jorik's voice crackled over the comms from above. Elra looked at the core, then at the tendrils. "Then we cut it off," she said. "What?" "The connections. Those tendrils are controlling everything. Sever them, and it loses coordination." The soldiers didn't question it. They moved. Small charges were placed along the nearest tendrils. The team fought to hold their position as the timers ticked down. "Charges set," one of the engineers shouted. "Detonate." The explosions tore through the chamber. Several tendrils snapped, recoiling violently. The pulsing rhythm faltered. For the first time, the creatures hesitated. "Again," Elra shouted. They pushed deeper, placing more charges, cutting more connections. Each detonation weakened the core's control. The creatures grew erratic, their movements less precise. "Keep going," the lead soldier urged. They reached the base of the core. Up close, it was even more massive than it had seemed from a distance. Its surface rippled, reacting to their presence. "Elra," Jorik's voice came through again. "Seismic readings are spiking. That whole chamber is becoming unstable." "We're almost done," she replied. The last charge was placed directly against the core. The timer began. "Fall back," the soldier ordered. They ran. The chamber shook violently as the core reacted, the remaining tendrils lashing out blindly. One of the soldiers was struck, thrown against the wall. Elra grabbed him, pulling him up. "Move." They reached the tunnel just as the timer hit 0. The explosion was not just a blast. It was a rupture. The core collapsed inward, its structure failing as the energy sustaining it dissipated. The pulsing stopped. The sound died. Above them, across the colony, the creatures froze. Then, one by one, they fell. Silence returned. Real silence. The team emerged hours later, battered but alive. Elra stepped out into the light of the surface, the sky above once again clear. Jorik approached her, relief written across his face. "You did it." She shook her head slightly. "We did it." Above them, the Earth fleet held position. Admiral Reyes's voice came through one last time. "Signals gone. Whatever was controlling them is finished." Elra looked up at the sky. "Thank you," she said. Reyes's reply was quiet. "You held the line. We just helped you finish it." This time, when the fleet departed, the silence they left behind felt different. Not empty. Peaceful. The colony would rebuild again. Stronger, wiser, because now they knew something the rest of the galaxy was still learning. Even when the darkness changes, even when the enemy evolves, there is a world out there that will answer. And when it does, it doesn't just save you. It fights with you. The silence lasted long enough for people to believe it was real. Weeks passed on Karth without tremors, without shadows moving beneath the ground, without the sky burning. The colony began to breathe again. Structures were rebuilt with reinforced foundations. New sensors were placed not just above the surface but deep within it. Patrols became routine instead of desperate. For the first time since the distress signal had been sent, children walked outside without being rushed back into shelters. Commander Elra then stood on a ridge overlooking the central district, watching the slow return of life. Reconstruction drones moved between skeletal buildings. Engineers argued over designs that would never again rely on a single system. Survivors spoke in quieter tones now, but there was something else beneath it. Resolve. Jorik stepped beside her, holding a data slate. "You should see this," he said. She took it, scanning the report. "Long-range scans?" she asked. He nodded. "We've expanded the array with what the Earth engineers left behind. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we had." Elra's eyes moved across the data, then slowed. "These energy readings," she said. "They're not natural." "No," Jorik replied. "They're not." The readings were faint, scattered, but they followed a pattern that made Elra's chest tighten. "How many?" she asked. "Confirmed. 3. Jorik said. "Unconfirmed. Maybe more." Elra looked back at the horizon. "They weren't just attacking," she said quietly. "They were seeding." Jorik didn't respond. He didn't need to. The realization settled heavily between them. What they had destroyed beneath Karth had not been the source. It had been a node. And there were others. The transmission array was silent when Elra entered the command center. It had become a place of cautious vigilance rather than constant panic. Screens displayed stable readings. Operators moved with measured efficiency. Still, something felt different. "Commander," the communications officer said. "We've been trying to reach the Earth fleet." Elra stopped. "Trying." "No response," she said. "Not even an automated relay." Elra frowned. "They answered before." "Yes," the officer said. "But now, nothing." Jorik stepped in behind her. "Maybe they're out of range." Elra shook her head slowly. "No, they told us they monitor signals like ours. If they were able to hear us before, they should hear us now." She looked at the faint energy signatures again. "They're already dealing with it," she said. The first sign came from orbit. A patrol satellite detected a distortion at the edge of the system. Not a hyperspace entry, not a conventional arrival, something else. It didn't expand outward like a ship exiting a jump. It unfolded. Space itself seemed to peel back, revealing a structure that had not traveled there but had been placed, hidden between dimensions, waiting. When it fully emerged, every sensor on Karth overloaded. The object was massive, larger than any ship they had seen, larger than the Earth flagship. It did not resemble a vessel built for travel. It resembled a weapon built for permanence. Elra stood in the command center, watching the feed stabilize. "What is that?" someone whispered. No one answered, because they all knew. This was not a remnant. This was the origin. The structure moved slowly into position above the planet, its surface shifting like living armor. Segments unfolded, revealing arrays of organic constructs that pulsed with the same energy they had seen underground. Then the signal began. Not a whisper, not a pulse. A voice. Clear, structured, intentional. "This world resists." The words echoed through every system, translated automatically into every known language. "This world adapts." Elra felt her pulse spike. "This world will be corrected." The transmission ended, and the sky darkened. From the massive structure, smaller forms detached. Hundreds of them, then thousands. They descended in controlled formations, not chaotic like before. This was not an invasion. This was a reclamation. "They learned from us," Jorik said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elra's mind raced. "Send the signal," she said. The communications officer hesitated. "Commander, if they're not responding." "Send it anyway," Elra said. The signal went out, stronger than before, amplified by every system they had rebuilt. "This is Commander Elra Ven of Colony Karth. We are under full-scale assault by a primary hostile construct. Enemy forces have escalated beyond previous encounters. If any allied forces are receiving this, we will hold as long as we can." She paused, then added, more quietly, "Earth, if you can hear us, we need you." The transmission faded into the void. The first impacts hit minutes later. The new enemy units were faster, more coordinated. They did not simply attack structures. They targeted command nodes, communication relays, defense systems. They were dismantling the colony's ability to respond in real time. Shields are failing in Sector 4. Medical hub compromised. They're bypassing our defenses. Elra took control. Fall back to secondary positions. Prioritize civilian evacuation routes. Do not engage unless you have a clear advantage. Jorik looked at her. We can't hold this. Elra met his gaze. We're not trying to win, she said. We're trying to survive. The days that followed blurred together. Fighting, retreating, regrouping. The colony shrank as sectors fell. Safe zones became smaller. Resources stretched thinner. But they held, not because they were stronger, but because they refused to break. On the fourth cycle, the central district came under direct assault. Elra stood at the front lines again, weapon in hand, surrounded by a mix of exhausted defenders and civilians who had chosen to fight rather than run. The sky above was filled with descending shapes. Jorik moved beside her. If this is it, Elra nodded. Then we make it count. The enemy advanced, and for a moment, it felt like the first days all over again. Hopeless, overwhelming, unstoppable. Then the sky changed. At first, it was just a flicker, a distortion at the edge of vision. Then another, and another. The massive structure in orbit shifted, its surface reacting. Too late. Space tore open, not in one place, but in dozens. The arrivals were not quiet. They did not slip into existence. They broke through. Ships emerged in waves. Their designs varied but unmistakably human. Some were massive carriers, others were sleek, heavily armed cruisers. Smaller strike vessels moved between them like predators. And at the center of it all, Aegis Prime. The voice that followed was not calm this time. It carried weight, force. This is Admiral Reyes of the Earth Defense Coalition, it said. All units, engage. The response was immediate. The Earth fleet did not form a defensive grid. They charged. The first volleys struck the massive structure in orbit with devastating precision. Sections of its surface erupted, exposing inner layers that pulsed erratically. The enemy responded. From the structure, new defenses activated. Energy barriers, weapon arrays, countermeasures that adapted in real time. But this time, they were not facing a single task force. They were facing a fleet that had prepared. Commander Ven, Reyes's voice came through directly. We received your signal. Elra exhaled, tension breaking for the first time in days. You took your time. A brief pause. We brought friends. On the surface, the tide shifted instantly. Drop pods fell once more, but this time there were hundreds. Earth warriors deployed across every active combat zone. New units, new equipment, heavier armor, more advanced weapons. They had not just returned. They had adapted too. Elra watched as one of the new squads engaged a group of enemy units. Their movements were faster than before, their coordination even tighter. They studied them, Jorik said. Elra nodded, and improved. Above, the battle intensified. The massive structure unleashed its full power, targeting the Earth fleet with weapons that bent space and energy. Ships were hit, some were lost, but the fleet did not break. They adapted mid-battle, shifting formations, redistributing firepower, exploiting weaknesses as they appeared. Aegis Prime to all units, Reyes's voice rang out. Focus fire on exposed cores. We take it apart piece by piece. The strategy was clear, not brute force, precision, the same method that had saved Karth before. But on a much larger scale. Elra returned to the front line. This time, she was not standing with a handful of survivors. She stood with warriors who had crossed the void twice to fight for a world that was not their own. One of the soldiers glanced at her. Miss us. She allowed herself a brief smile. You always show up late. He nodded toward the sky. Yeah, but we show up. The final push began when the outer layers of the massive structure were breached. Deep within it, something pulsed. A core, not just a control node. The source. We found it, Reyes said. Same pattern as before. Bigger, smarter. Elra tightened her grip on her weapon. What do you need from us? A pause. Then, we need you to finish it. The plan formed quickly. A combined strike team would be inserted directly into the structure through the breaches created by the fleet. Their objective was simple: reach the core, destroy it, end it. Elra didn't hesitate. She was going. Jorik didn't argue this time. He just nodded. Bring it down. The insertion was chaos. The team moved through the breach as the structure fought back. Internal defenses activated. Organic corridors shifted, trying to trap them. But they pushed forward. The environment inside was worse than anything beneath the surface of Karth. The walls pulsed with energy. The air vibrated with that same rhythmic sound, louder now. Stronger. Alive. They know we're here, one of the soldiers said. Good, Elra replied. Saves us the trouble of finding them. The path to the core was not straight. It twisted, changed, but the Earth soldiers adapted in real time, using scanning equipment and predictive algorithms to stay on course. They fought constantly. Enemy units emerged from the walls themselves, attacking in coordinated bursts. The team took losses, but they kept moving. Finally, they reached it. The core. It was immense. A vast, glowing mass suspended within a chamber that seemed to exist outside normal space. Tendrils extended in every direction, connecting it not just to the structure, but beyond. To other systems, other worlds. This isn't just Karth, Elra said. No, the lead soldier replied. It's a network. Elra felt a surge of determination. Then we end it here. Charges were placed, more powerful than before, designed for one purpose: total destruction. Timer set, the soldier said. The core reacted instantly. The chamber shook violently. The tendrils lashed out, trying to protect it. Enemy units flooded the room. Hold them, someone shouted. Elra fired, moving instinctively, covering the engineers as they secured the final charge. Done. Fall back. They ran. The chamber began to collapse around them as the core destabilized. The exit path was already shifting. Alternate route. The lead soldier called out. They pushed through a narrowing corridor, the structure trying to close in on them. Behind them, the core pulsed erratically. Faster, louder, then, silence. For a fraction of a second. The explosion that followed was not contained. It tore through the structure from the inside out. The shockwave rippled through space itself. Outside, the massive construct shuddered. Cracks spread across its surface, glowing with unstable energy. Aegis Prime to all units. Reyes's voice came through. Pull back. It's going critical. The Earth fleet disengaged, moving to a safe distance. On the surface, Elra and her team emerged from the collapsing structure just as it began to break apart. They reached the extraction point as the sky lit up. The massive structure in orbit fractured. Then it exploded, not in a single blast, but in a cascading collapse of energy and matter, fragments dissolving into nothingness as the core's destruction unraveled it completely. The shockwave passed over the planet harmlessly, dissipated by the fleet's shielding. And then, it was over. Truly over. The remaining enemy units on the surface froze. Then collapsed. The connection was gone. For the final time, Elra stood in silence as the sky cleared. Jorik's voice came through her comm. It's finished. She looked at the horizon. At the people who had survived. At the warriors who had fought beside them. Yes, she said softly. It is. Above, the Earth fleet held position. Admiral Reyes appeared on the screen once more. You did it, she said. Elra shook her head. We did it. Reyes allowed a small smile. Fair enough. Elra hesitated. Will they come back? Reyes's expression grew serious. Not like this. Not from that network. Elra nodded slowly. That's enough, she said. Reyes inclined her head. You're not alone anymore, Commander. Not just because we show up, but because now you know how to fight back. The connection ended. This time, when the fleet departed, it did not feel like something was being taken away. It felt like something had been left behind. Knowledge, strength, a promise. In the years that followed, Karth became more than a colony. It became a warning, a signal, a place that answered others the same way it had once been answered. And somewhere, far beyond their skies, Earth continued to listen. Because when the darkness rises, when the enemy evolves, when hope begins to fade, there will always be a moment when someone thinks no help is coming. And then, humanity arrives. In a universe that often looks away, humanity doesn't. When the last light fades and hope is gone, there is one truth that echoes across the stars: if you call for help, Earth will answer.